Hey there, welcome to episode 44 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. I'm recording this episode 44 on the morning of December 22nd, 2023. The year is quickly winding down. I think we have one more episode for this calendar year. Thought I might, as the year wraps up, touch on a strange subject, but bear with me. Elastic versus plastic. So I've been reading this book about software architecture. I want to do. And it's a software architect is a strange title. It is one that I've had. It's one that I hold, I suppose. What is a software architect? What does that mean? If you're familiar with architect as a role, you probably think someone who draws plans for constructing probably a building, maybe a home, maybe an office building. So there are architects, there are software architects. So as I was reading this book, it occurred to me that one of the reasons there's so much chaos in the software architects' day is because software is changeable. Buildings rarely so easily changeable. Huge difference. So I thought I might touch on that today in a little bit more general sense. The show notes today have only 3 links. A link to our homepage, which I'll start putting in more frequently to underscore how to reach us. Our GitHub organization link, so you can see where our projects are. None of them are done enough as they should be. And I have a link to an article that gives an example of elasticity versus plasticity. So you can visualize that. So the general idea, some things are rigid, brittle, concrete even, like a building, but not necessarily a building, but a thing that you make, build, construct, bake. Could be food. You never know. They should not be changed too often or too much without substantial effort. Maybe you'd have to replace it completely. So once you build a building, you can't decide tomorrow that we need to make version 2. Now it's a much more involved process. So that's on one end of the spectrum. That's more plastic. I'll get to the details on this. Other things are more flexible, more malleable. We can change them a little bit or even a lot, and we can see what happens. And then when we've inevitably broken something by making those changes, we change some more. We call it version 2, version 2.1, 2.11. Everybody's been through that process. So there's the plastic side, which is a little bit more rigid or a little bit more difficult to change. And there's the elastic side where, just as it sounds, a little bit more stretchy. You make some changes, make some more changes. We can apply these to our volunteer projects and our volunteer effort. Here's how. So rigid projects, plastic projects, they require careful attention because we can't unbake the cake, as I sometimes say. Things that are plastic require more planning, more attention, more collaboration. So with a cake, you may have someone helping you make a cake. You may be making a lot of cakes. So you make the cakes, you bake them, maybe you have a pipeline of mixing the ingredients, forming the cake, putting it in the oven, baking it, comes out, attending to it, whether you're decorating it or stacking them in a layer cake. Once those are done, though, they're done. You can't easily go back and add ingredients to the cake. You can't change the flavor of the cake. It is done as is. If you want to start over, you have to throw it away. So once you have given the cake to someone, sold, whatever the case, that's it. They have it. It is in the wild. So hardware is hard. Whether it's a cake, whether it's a computer, whether it's a building, a car, etc. If you build a car and you want to do a recall, it's a rather involved process because you've got to bring it back. The car is already out in the wild. It's already being used. So if you need to change a tangible thing after you've given it to someone or place it somewhere for people to use, you have a lot of work to do. Sometimes it's even impossible to do that. If you build a satellite and launch it into space, it is probably, with Earth orbit exception, a done deal. It's probably not going to come back and get serviced too easily. So a new plastic project has to be done. Defining it when done can be tricky. Some artists and creators sometimes will have difficulty determining when their project is done. I have known artists who are always kind of fiddling around with the end of a painting or maybe a sculpture. On the other hand, I've known some artists that definitely know it's done, even though to the casual observer, unaesthetic people like myself, you might think that doesn't look done. But when you're making something tangible, when you're cooking something, when you are mixing something, maybe a drink, maybe paint, you know, or you at least have some idea when it is done, and then you send it out into the world. Flexible projects have a different setup. The elastic project. So where a plastic project, if you change it, it might break. I mean, if you try to change it, there's a lot to do, right? So in the material science world, a plastic material is one that will fracture or deform. You can say you bend a paperclip. You can see that if you bend it back and forth a few times, the metal at the point where you're bending it starts to fatigue, and then it sometimes it'll even neck, so it'll change thickness a little bit. Maybe it'll even discolor sometimes, depending on the metal, the thickness and so on. So it'll eventually break. Right? So you have moved from the elastic region of the metal to the plastic region, but you can break things if you push them too hard or so on. So that's sort of getting. That's just an example, but I'm trying to help you visualize what I'm talking about, which is that a rigid thing that you've made, and if we stick to tech, it could be a computer or a physical object or a sensor, a light, maybe a speaker. You could make an art installation. It could be user interface, physical user, like the button on a crosswalk, right? So those things are out there. Flexible projects that are more elastic, you still have to plan them, but you have opportunities to make changes more easily. So sometimes, probably software is the only thing that this is so easily applied to. There are probably other examples, but now that things are more digital, for like let's take a sort of software example. If you were to publish music back in the old days, you might press a record, you might record it on magnetic tape in a little cassette or an 8-track. So similarly, it's a little bit more plastic. It's a little bit more difficult to change once it's out there. If you printed a book, you might have a second edition, a reprint, but the first edition's already done. It's out there. People have it. Software or soft versions of things that are more elastic, I can publish music online. Maybe I can update the MP3. I can do that same thing with audio programs like this. So I can publish the audio, but I can also change the audio, republish it in place. Because people have become used to streaming, you're able to make these changes. Same with the book. I can, instead of being stuck with the book that's out there, if you use a more draconian service like Amazon's Kindle, or if you merely say, hey, there are some typos that have been fixed, you can tell people, just grab the new. You can have version numbers on your book. And so similarly, software can be updated and fixed. Mobile applications, it's the same thing. A mobile application could be a book or a music, a video. It could be an actual application with a user interface and whatnot. You can change those things, and you can change them again, and you can change them again. Without a clear plan, it's too easy it's very easy to believe that we can just keep changing things forever, and that gets to be sort of a frustration point for the end user. If I was changing my music every day, if I was tweaking the mix and I just kept changing it, or if I was rewriting entire passages of books and so on, your user, your listener, your reader Might get a little fed up after a while. Like, I don't want your new changes. So without a clear plan, it can be too easy to think we can fix things forever. And it's the curse of the point release. And you know you're in trouble, and this is a software architect headache, is when you know you're going to do what they call a point release immediately. I've actually worked on things like this where you're working on version 1 and issues are found that are, quote, moved to the point release. So you are already planning on a version 1.1. So you're going to release things that you know are bad. It would be like sending out a cake that is doesn't taste right. Like, we'll fix the second cake. Like, what the first cake is going out to people. So it's a double-edged sword. Best planning, best collaboration, even the best finished product can have flaws found after, right? That first cake. You should try to make that first cake good. If it's easier to fix, I guess you can do it after. But if it's a rigid project like a cake, that may cause problems. So the difference between the plastic project that has that extra overhead of fixing things and a elastic project that can be a little bit more stretchy and can be fixed in place makes a real difference for the end user, makes a real difference for the people working on the project, especially if you are now working on a new version of the project at the same time you're working on the current version of the project. So the ability to be flexible, to have an elastic project that can stretch to fit needs, to make change, is not just a matter of, oh, we can fix the bug later. Nothing is free. Nothing is free. So when we collaborate on public-facing projects, these are things that people will use. They will interact with them. They may depend upon them. Ideally, the projects that we are working on will fill some needs, will close some gaps, will make day-to-day a little bit easier for people. Information sharing, riding public transit, things like this. So we want to volunteer our time on these open source projects. Hopefully they will lead to good places. That business model I've talked about previously. We don't want to find that we are wishing that our time was not wasted. So if we spend time on the plastic components, suppose we were working on some hardware. We actually had a hardware hackathon back in February this year. So suppose we had a hardware component. In that case, it was Bluetooth tags from Wiliot. Suppose we deployed Bluetooth tag components at bus stops, which was one application I came up with. So you make smart bus stops with Bluetooth tags, actually the Bluetooth tag reader, and you make smart bus passes out of Bluetooth tags. So once you've started deploying these, in this example, smart bus passes that have Bluetooth tag, like there's no battery, right? So you can have a sticker. You would stick it on a smart bus pass in this example. The reader could be at the bus stops and could be in the bus. So you'd be able to have an identity-free tracking device, I suppose. So you wouldn't know who it is. You would just know that someone got on a bus at a certain stop and they're getting off at another one. So you'd be able to track ridership and route usage without having to divulge personal information, right? So once you've deployed the bus pass system, the plastic part, you can't simply say, oh, the bus passes you have now, they would last for more than a day. Oh, sorry, that bus pass isn't worth anything anymore. You got to chuck it. That becomes confusing. It's not a good user experience. It becomes expensive. On the software side, though, if you find a software person working on hardware, they might say, oh, we can just fix it tomorrow, or we'll change it again this morning, and we'll change it again in the afternoon. So that starts to get frustrating for everybody involved because the hardware side cannot change so quickly. You have to be a little bit more deliberate. It's a little bit more plastic, right? When you try to change it, it might break. It might neck. I don't know if there's a picture. There's not a picture on that website. Necking is it's an experiment we did in way back in the college days. It was I think Young's Modulus is on there. So when you pull on a metal bar, which is plastic, I mean it's metal, but it's a plastic device. When you pull on either end of it with a machine designed to do this, you can see that like a spring or a paper clip, the metal has an elastic region, so it gives a little bit, but eventually when you cross over Young's modulus, F, I think it is, and you can go into the plastic region. The bar will start to stretch and it will neck. So the part where it's stretching will become thinner and it'll look like a little, it'll look like a neck. So it's not as easy to make big changes to the hardware or plastic side of projects, but people that are working on the elastic side may find it easier to plan to change ahead of time. So it's a totally different thought process. One way to hopefully meet in the middle and to enable projects to come out together, so to speak. Clearly, you can test one smart bus pass in my example at one bus stop and get on one bus and make changes. That's a little bit easier. Once you have people using it, it becomes a little bit more tricky. Same with software, but it's a little bit easier to tell someone to update their app or to merely update a mobile website, and the changes are there, but they have to be synchronized with the hardware side, with the smart bus pass. And this applies to everything, right? This is just one contrived example. So one way you can make that whole thing work a little bit better is something we call co-creation. You can actually work on a project so you co-create with the people that are going to use it. So we can say, let's involve actual open or public transit users, hand people a few smart bus passes, have them use it. Like we have these 2 bus stops set up and a couple of buses that will interact, and we can actually watch how it works. We can develop the software with them so that they can see what the user interface should be, how it should function, when it should provide certain pieces of information, and so on. So when the smart bus pass needs to be changed, we've only affected a couple of our co-creator people, and we can connect that with the software process. And it's not easy, but if you do involve the actual users, you will find fewer surprises later rather than hearing people clamoring at your tech support line. Or, hey, if you have a restaurant, you taste the food before it goes out. So once it goes out, you can't so easily change things. But if you have a soft open of your restaurant and you have people taste your menu ahead of time, you may have digital menus and you can update the ingredients. Or you may have someone have an allergic reaction to some of your menu items, and they say, is there shrimp in this? And you say, yeah, there is. Like, I'm deathly allergic to shrimp and shellfish. So when you find these things out in a controlled environment, you can change the menu, obviously. You can change the food and the ingredients in future versions of your food product. The menu, especially if it's digital, you can update your website with ingredients and a little shellfish warning. Some of our foods are made near shellfish. You might have to deal with cross-contamination. So that's a hardware feature that's really hard to fix once it's happened. So there are things that are easy to change into the future, but there's the present plastic version of your products and services that are either impossible to change because they've already been consumed, or they're already out there. You've already built the building. Like I said, you can't unbake the cake. You can make a new cake, but the cake is baked. It's out. But even with the cake or food versions, you can update the menu, but you have to make sure you synchronize those changes. Same goes with software and hardware. Same goes with most things in the world. It is the synchronization and coherent interaction with the various pieces that can change, which can change more quickly. Some cannot change at all. So making sure everything works. If you've ever purchased a cell phone and you receive an over-the-air, they call it OTA update, your phone hardware cannot change, but the software can change essentially whenever Apple or Google want. The mobile apps on it, same thing, but the operating system, the very iOS or Android underpinnings of your mobile phone, they might send out monthly updates or so on. Those things can change, but we broke the current version of this on that version of the phone. Whoopsie. If you've ever heard the term bricked, you've turned a phone into a brick because they failed to test a software update which is elastic. on a piece of hardware that has a particular configuration or setting or device or feature that is plastic, that cannot change, not without doing serious damage. And yeah, whoopsie, that update doesn't work on the iPhone 13 or doesn't work on the Pixel 5 or whatever, right? So these things do happen because once you have the plastic pieces in the world and you are able to make elastic changes to the parts that need the plastic pieces, hopefully these terms are actually making sense. It's something to consider. And when you have civic volunteer projects where, especially if you have civic volunteers who aren't sticking with a project forever, which is likely, people need to understand the work that one person does needs to be clear, documented, if you will, understood. This is why it's particularly difficult to have people contribute code or anything to projects. It doesn't have to be code. But if you do something and nobody knows exactly what the nuances are, later that can come back and bite people. Can bite the people working on the project, can bite the people using the project, the customer, if you will. So being cognizant of how your system works, whether it's food, whether it's art, whether it's an art installation with some changeable pieces, it could be city planning, it could be mobile application development, it could be anything. There are some parts that are easily changed. There are some parts that are extremely difficult to change. And being aware of how those all fit together, especially when the parts that can't change are beyond your control. If we use the bus example again, you certainly are not going to be able to update the bus part of the whole system. So some of the plastic parts really are plastic and cannot be changed without breaking things. I assume you can hear that. Oop, something broke somewhere. So these are actually job and life skills, believe it or not. I mentioned I was reading that software architect book. I've been a software architect. When you need to know how systems work, I was a software architect at Intel. We had a hardware maker board, so to speak. We had a couple, actually, Galileo, Edison. The Edison board, piece of hardware, a little printed circuit board with a microprocessor and sensors and places where you could attach more sensors. So that was very difficult to change. You could solder on it, but you're more likely to break it than not if you start doing those sorts of things. On the other hand, the software that was on it, you could update it at a whim. You could write your own software, make changes. So making those two things work together was sometimes a challenge. The hardware for the Edison had some elements to it that made it a challenge for the person assembling it in the field. So it wasn't always snapping the fingers and it just works. And the software should work. Why is it not working? Oh, because you didn't put this on there correctly. So it's not smooth sailing all the time. But when you learn how these things work and how it impacts the people using what you're building, and it could be a project that you're working on, it could be, like I said, it could be food or drink. It could be any creative work that or maybe even not so creative. But when you are making or building or assembling a thing that is going to be very difficult to change, you have to be aware that you have to get it right the first time, or you have to come really close. And knowing and understanding that is not only a job skill, although it is an essential job skill, it's a life skill. Just understanding how the world works, so to speak. So yeah, making sure that these things come out working correctly so that people understand how they function. People understand how to update or accept a change to the elastic part of the endeavor is also important. So being clear with customer expectations, user expectations, so people understand what they are using and how it will change when you fix things. If you can actually accomplish those things and make a positive user experience, a positive experience for the people who are eating your food, drinking your drinks, using your software, reading your book, listening to your music, if you can accomplish that seamlessly so that everybody continues to enjoy through a change, through an update, that's gold. That's an actual marketable skill to be able to manage that. And so many of us encounter issues day to day where even things that cannot change, they bump up against the things that must change, and they're made worse by the things that did change. Again, the phone brick example. If you own a Tesla, you know that you're going to have to receive an update to handle the self-driving vehicle features. There are some parts of some cars that cannot change easily, so they may have to be brought in for a physical update. I don't know if you hear that siren. So the plastic part is the car. The elastic part is the over-the-air update of software. Tesla and more cars nowadays can receive over-the-air updates to features, and you're able to update the car without bringing it into the shop, but it's still considered a recall. You're making a material change to how it functions, and from a safety perspective, it's critical to account for many of these changes and how they impact that safety. So this is also under the same umbrella of a true job skill that is important to have. It's important to be able to understand your system and understand the user and understand how the parts that have changed, especially an over-the-air update, where let's hope it doesn't happen without telling someone. But if your phone just updates or your car just updates and you weren't really aware of it, anybody with a Windows machine where it wanted to update in the middle of doing something important, it's decided it's going to update, and now it doesn't work. Now my printer doesn't work. So we've all experienced these situations, and one of the reasons they happen is because people don't consider the user. They don't consider the user experience. They don't consider how people are using this product or service. They don't understand that, I'm just going to make this little change. Ripples out into the world can make things not work at the worst possible times. So it's something to think about. It's something that it's difficult to sort of, can't really force volunteers to account for these things, but they really should. And this is where co-creation really comes into play, is that when you can see the people using what you're working on, when you can, as I always say, when you cook someone, some food for someone, the very first question you ask when you offer it to them, maybe they've come over and they're sitting at your table in your dining room or kitchen or wherever, or how many food truck owners do I know that did this? How is it? That's your co-creation feedback. And if you decide to tweak your menu, that person can taste the new version, but they've seen what you're delivering to your public, if you're a retail, if you're a restaurant or so on. So that co-creation process can be instrumental in delivering a good, useful, delicious, functioning, effective product or service. And it's something that we hope to integrate into what we're working on if we do more hardware projects. But anything that involves a physical manifestation, it could be a sign that goes somewhere to direct someone to download. So, if you print out 1,000 posters to put in buses or at bus stops and whatnot, and they have the wrong QR code, that's going to be a plastic change. You're going to have to throw all those away. So yeah, just being aware of how systems work. Systems can become more and more complicated. Hopefully they do not become more and more complex. So complicated systems with many moving parts. Some of those moving parts will have to remain fixed once they're put into the world. Others can be changed, and it's always a challenge to be flip. So there you go. Kind of an unusual topic, but it's something that occurred to me when I was reading this book. I'm not even going to put the book in the links. You're not going to read it anyway, but it's still an interesting undertaking. And yes, whenever you hear about software, or more generally, these elastic things that can change and stretch on a whim, I'm going to guess that most of the problems you encounter day by day, even process, hey, this was supposed to be some other, that changed. There's a new rule. There's a new law. There's a new procedure. We updated the website. We didn't tell the people that are sending out the thing. That it could be a myriad of things. You've encountered it. It's often the result of a lack of synchronization between these different parts that can change, that can't change, and did change, and so on. So it's something that I hope that we can learn more about in our project work, and it's something to think about in general in the world. So wrap it up there. Thank you for listening. A little bit unusual, an episode for the wrapping up of December. We have some fun things planned for January. Whether people in the greater Vegas area take part in them is another story. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for listening, as always. And we'll catch you on the new year. There will be one more episode during the final week of 2023, every week. And then we'll start cooking with gas. Thanks for listening. Take care.